Thousands of ducks are released straight into rice paddies in the middle of the growing season. No fences, no supervision, just ducks, rice, and what looks like total chaos. At first glance, it feels like a disaster waiting to happen. Rice fields are fragile. The ecosystem is sensitive. One wrong move could wipe out an entire harvest. Yet this is the method China chose to rescue more than 40% of its farmland, severely degraded by the pressure of 4 million tons of pesticides used every year, and something no one expected happened. After just one growing season, the rice fields didn't collapse. They began to recover. So what was really happening beneath the water's surface? And why is a method that seems ancient now challenging modern industrial agriculture? Mandarin Tech reveals the story in this video. In less than a century, farmland across the world has become almost completely mechanized. Transplanters, harvesters, and sprayers replaced manual labor. Synthetic fertilizers made crops grow faster. Pesticides allowed pests and diseases to be controlled at a scale never seen before. As a result, global food production increased many times over, but the cost has become increasingly clear. Each year, agriculture is responsible for about 20–25% of total global greenhouse gas emissions, most of it coming from chemical fertilizers and degraded farmland. Pesticides alone have severely reduced soil microorganisms, disrupting the biological cycles that naturally maintain soil fertility. According to many studies, more than 40% of the world's agricultural land is gradually losing its ability to regenerate, forcing farmers to apply higher and higher amounts of fertilizer and chemicals just to maintain the same yields. The problem becomes even more serious when more than half of the world's population depends on rice. Rice fields are not just a farming system. They are a foundation of global food security. When this ecosystem weakens, the risk no longer stays within individual fields, but spreads across the entire system that feeds billions of people. A dangerous cycle begins to form, quietly weakening agricultural ecosystems season after season. If modern agriculture is creating its own problems, then where does the real way out lie? Ironically, the answer to the modern agricultural crisis lies in practices that existed long before chemicals ever appeared. For centuries in rice-growing regions across East Asia, rice fields were never treated as a single-purpose production surface. They were living ecosystems where rice and ducks coexisted. Ducks were released into the paddies shortly after transplanting, moving all day through the shallow water, eating insects, young weeds, and gently stirring the top layer of mud. Their droppings became a direct source of nutrients for the soil, replacing much of the need for external fertilizers. No machinery, no pesticides. Yet the system maintained stable yields over long periods of time. Agricultural records show that the rice duck model has been practiced for more than 600 years, long enough to prove that its effectiveness comes not from sheer output, but from biological balance. Within this system, pest outbreaks were rare. The soil was not exhausted, and rice fields were able to sustain themselves season after season. When the first ducks are released into the rice fields, the natural reaction for many people is concern. The rice plants are still young and fragile, and just one strong impact could ruin an entire harvest. But very quickly, a different pattern begins to emerge. Ducks largely avoid the rice plants. Instead, they focus on whatever moves in the water and grows faster than rice. Exactly the things farmers constantly struggle to control. Brown plant hoppers, stem borers, leaf hoppers, and various aquatic insects become their main food source. As the flock moves continuously through the field, the ducks disrupt the pest life cycle at an early stage, causing pest populations to drop noticeably within just a few weeks. At the same time, their movement stirs the water surface, destroying mosquito larvae and other harmful organisms, significantly reducing the need for pesticide spraying. Weeds also lose their chance to grow as they once did. Ducks feed on young weed shoots, duckweed, barnyard grass, and even wild rice, plants that normally compete directly with rice for nutrients. Every step the ducks take interrupts weed root formation, preventing weeds from developing into dense mats. This constant disturbance creates an unexpected effect. Oxygen is introduced into the water and the top layer of soil, reducing anaerobic conditions, limiting soil compaction, and allowing rice roots to grow deeper and stronger. Many researchers compare this to a form of natural tilling that happens throughout the day. And throughout this entire process, duck droppings are spread evenly across the field like a continuous stream of organic fertilizer. Rich in nitrogen and organic matter, this nutrient source feeds both the soil and the rice plants more steadily, avoiding the over-application common with chemical fertilizers, while also reducing the risk of surface and groundwater pollution. To turn what seems like chaotic movement into an advantage, farmers must control every step of releasing the ducks with precision. The ducks are introduced only 2 to 3 weeks after transplanting, when the rice plants are strong enough to withstand movement in the water without bending or breaking. If released earlier, young seedlings can be damaged. If released too late, the effectiveness of pest and weed control drops significantly. Duck density is also not something that can be left to chance. Studies in China and Japan show that the optimal range is typically 150 to 300 ducks per hectare, depending on soil conditions, water depth, and rice variety. Too few ducks produce a biological impact that is too weak to replace chemical inputs. Too many, on the other hand, can cloud the water, stress the root system, and reduce the plant's ability to photosynthesize. Equally important is the timing of removing the ducks from the field. When rice enters the panicle initiation stage and begins preparing to flower, the ducks must be completely withdrawn. This is the most sensitive phase of the rice plant, where even a small disturbance can directly affect the number of grains formed on each panicle. In rice duck farming systems monitored in China and Japan, spending on pesticides typically drops by 50 to 70%, while chemical fertilizer costs fall by 20 to 40%. This means total input costs per hectare of rice fields are significantly reduced, often starting in the very first growing season. For many small farming households, this is a matter of survival at a time when agricultural input prices continue to rise. But the benefits do not stop at simply spending less. The value of the rice itself also changes. Rice produced in rice duck systems is often classified as ecological rice or low-chemical rice. And in many Asian markets, it can sell for 10 to 30% higher prices than conventionally grown rice. Consumers are willing to pay extra for safety and sustainability they can recognize and trust. Alongside rice, the duck flock becomes a real economic product of its own. With access to natural food sources in the fields, ducks grow quickly with low reliance on commercial feed and minimal dependence on antibiotics. At the end of the season, farmers can sell duck meat or eggs, creating an additional income stream independent of rice prices and helping to spread market risk. In many systems, revenue from ducks is enough to offset a large share of rice production costs, turning an ecological system into an economic model capable of balancing itself. As chemicals are withdrawn, rice fields begin to change in ways people have long forgotten. The water gradually becomes clearer, algae levels drop, and the smell of anaerobic decay disappears. Creatures that were once pushed out of the farming system start to return. Beneficial insects appear first, followed by frogs, small fish, dragonflies, and water birds. The rice field no longer operates like a starch factory, but slowly reclaims its role as a living ecosystem. More importantly, studies have recorded a 20 to 30% reduction in methane emissions compared to conventionally farmed, chemical-intensive rice fields. The constant movement of the ducks disrupts anaerobic conditions in the soil, the primary factor behind methane production in flooded rice paddies. This means rice fields not only reduce their environmental impact, but actively contribute to mitigating climate change. At a deeper level, the rice duck model is not simply less harmful agriculture. It is moving toward regenerative agriculture, where soil is restored, biological cycles are reconnected, and ecosystems can sustain themselves over multiple growing seasons, rather than constantly needing to be rescued by chemical inputs. This system requires precise farming knowledge, from the timing of duck release and flock density, to water level management and close monitoring of rice growth. Even small mistakes can quickly turn biological benefits into production risks. There are also threats from predators. Snakes, foxes, feral dogs, and birds of prey can cause serious losses if the ducks are not properly protected. In regions with labor shortages or limited capacity for supervision, this risk becomes a real barrier. More importantly, not every ecosystem is suitable. Areas without a stable water supply, fields with steep terrain, or rice paddies that have been heavily polluted may not provide the biological foundation the system depends on. This shows that the rice duck model is not a universal formula, but a solution that must be carefully chosen, adapted, and applied in the right place, under the right conditions. When the idea of using rabbits to revive the desert first began to take shape, Wong understood one thing clearly. For the rabbits to survive, he first needed a plant strong enough to stand its ground against scorching winds and shifting sand. Out of dozens of options, only one species met every harsh requirement: the willow. Willows became the foundation of the entire ecosystem because their roots can reach nearly 90 meters deep, tapping into water layers that most plants can't reach. Once those roots take hold, they stabilize the sand, weaken the force of the wind, and create a cooler microclimate stable enough for life to begin. That's why the willow wasn't just another plant. It was the starting switch for the entire ecological loop. To turn willows into the backbone of the ecosystem, Wong had to face a challenge that had gone unsolved for centuries. How do you keep a tree alive in a place where the ground gets hot enough to scorch insects in minutes? In Kabuki, the wind doesn't just blow, it carries sand like razor blades, capable of stripping bark and ripping out roots in just a few days. On top of that, surface temperatures above 70 degrees Celsius make germination almost impossible. That's why planting a willow here isn't as simple as dig a hole and drop in a tree. It's a constant battle with nature. Planting teams have to track faint pockets of moisture hidden beneath the sand, the last lifelines of the land. When they find a spot that can hold water, they dig deep pits and immediately shield them with wire mesh, reeds, and temporary barriers to protect them from the next strong gust of wind. The young willows are treated with special moisture-retaining solutions and anchored with wooden frames so they won't be ripped out overnight. Water has to be used sparingly. Drip irrigation delivers only enough for the roots to sense life and push themselves deeper into the soil, clinging to the earth, clinging to their only chance of survival in this harsh sea of sand. Once the first bands of willow trees grew large enough to cast shade and retain moisture in the soil, Wong introduced the most important link in his restoration model, bringing Rex rabbits into a closed, controlled ecosystem. These rabbits were never released into the wild. They were raised in tightly managed ecological farms, where each one had both economic and ecological value. Their meat became a clean food source, their fur was used in high-end fashion products, and their organs supported traditional medicine. But what truly turned the Rex rabbit into an ecological weapon was its droppings. Rabbit manure is extremely rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, nutrients the desert lacks entirely. When released into the environment, it doesn't just fertilize the soil, it helps loose sand bind together into a moist, nutrient-rich layer of humus. Even more interesting, Rex rabbits cannot digest grass seeds. So every time they dig or forage, intact seeds end up mixed in their droppings and get scattered across the land, each one wrapped in a natural fertilizer pouch that allows it to sprout even under brutal desert conditions. As a result, new vegetation keeps appearing on its own, expanding the green coverage with minimal human intervention. Thanks to the arrival of the Rex rabbits, the structure of the new ecosystem gradually became clear and began operating like a self-balancing machine. The willow canopies provided shade and a steady source of food for the rabbits. The rabbits, in return, gave the land what it lacked most: nutrient-rich humus. This new soil held moisture, reduced erosion, and became the foundation for even stronger willow growth. This closed loop turned every hectare of sand into a natural humus-producing factory, generating more than 5 tons a year. Enough for a once barren, rock-hard stretch of desert to transform into fertile farmland in just 3 to 5 years. When the model scaled up, more than 200 million willow trees formed a massive green barrier, cutting wind speeds by up to 90% and preventing over 15 million tons of sand from shifting each year. Areas that were once helpless against sandstorms have now been restored with greenery across 700 to 800 square miles, creating a solid foundation for expanding the Rex rabbit farming model. As the ecosystem stabilized, The population of 1.2 million Rex rabbits not only helped regenerate the soil, but also became an economic spearhead, generating over 100 million yuan each year and providing thousands of families with a sustainable source of income in a place once considered uninhabitable. In the end, the story of rice and ducks is more than just a farming method. It is a reminder. As modern agriculture begins to confront its own limits, the real way forward may not lie in more complex technology, but in a deeper understanding of nature itself. Amid chemicals, machinery, and constant pressure to increase yields, ecosystems that were once ignored are quietly proving the power of balance. And perhaps the future of global food security will be built on these principles that seem old, yet remain profoundly relevant today. If you found these perspectives interesting, please like this video and follow Mandarin Tech to continue exploring the hidden systems shaping our engineered and natural world.